in recording our session, and we'll start off with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So according to my calculations, we are at the tail end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. The two of them we read were naked, the man and his wife, yet they felt no shame. And I'm just looking at I'm looking at the translation of his wife, and it says Adam v'ishto. Isha is woman, so really it's simply the man and his woman. It's definitely possessive, that it's his woman, not necessarily his wife. I'm just that's jumping off the page to me, because I'm wondering, like, a wife is a legal status,
Correct.
and we didn't see any kind of a wedding ceremony performed here, so I'm wondering why translate as a wife.
Why man and his wife? Why not husband? They didn't. That's why wife doesn't.
Exactly. Ha-adam, which is the human. Ha-adam v'ishto. It's very generic. The man and his wife. The man and the human and his woman. That we really don't. There's no description of anything that we would recognize as a wedding ceremony in these early chapters of Genesis. I'm thinking about Isaac and Rebecca, when Eliezer goes to bring back Rebecca, and the description is that Isaac brought Rebecca into his tent, and he loved her, and he was comforted about the loss of his wife. So, in Jewish tradition, we have 3 ways that you can get married. One is exchanging an object of value, typically a ring, but it could be anything, and saying the phrase, with this, whatever it is, X, you are made holy to me, hare ak mikudeshet li b'tabad zo kadat Moshe v'Yisrael. The second is with a written contract, and of course that's the ketubah. And the third is sexual intercourse for the purpose of marriage. So that is symbolized by the yichud, being the couple being alone together following the wedding ceremony. We don't assume or expect that couples today are actually going to consummate the wedding, but in a world where there was a lot of separation between men and women, except for intimate partners, just the fact that you were in a room alone together with the door closed is a presumption of intimacy. So anyway, does anybody have a different translation, or does everybody have the man and his wife?
Friedman's got human and woman.
There you go. So much more of a literal translation. Lisa?
Let's see. The altar is wife, and then it says the two of them were naked, and the human and his woman, and they were not ashamed. So I have a quick question. So what was the word you said for wife?
Ishto is the way it's literally his woman, the Ishto.
Okay.
Isha. Remember, we had Ish and Isha. The text explained that to us earlier, that the man is called Ish and the woman is called Isha because she comes from the man.
So so later in Genesis, there's isn't Abraham's sister-in-law also called Isha? She marries Abraham's brother Is her name not Isha at the end of chapter 11?
Oh, at the end of chapter 11. Good. Well, if you gave me the reference, I can go find it. Let's see. The end of chapter 11. Let's see. We got a lot of genealogy. Let's see. Oh,
So
okay.
it's like 1129.
1129. Okay. Abraham and Nahor took to themselves wives, the name of Abraham's wife being Sarai. Let's see. 29. Nashim, they took a woman, Nashim, Shem, Eshet, Abraham. Yes, so there's a distinction there between women and wives. Is that what you're asking, Lisa?
Well, so then there's Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Ishka.
Right.
So is that the same word or not the same word?
The word, so let's just look at the verse. Vayikach Avram v'Nachor lahem nashim. Avram and Nahor took women.
Okay.
Shem Eshet Abraham, the name of the woman of Abraham was Sarai. V'Shem Eshet Nahor Milcah. The name of the wife of Nahor was Milcah. So yeah, they're clearly, well, I mean, I don't know.
And the father of Ishka.
Right.
Rabbi,
Yes.
this was written by men,
Yes.
and they wanted to give the idea of a legal status rather than just grab somebody.
Right. Although, you know, as we see with Isaac and Rebecca, the fact that they go alone into a tent and love each other, that's what transforms the relationship from two individuals to a married couple. And, you know, we've talked before about the fact that there's no penalty associated with a man having intercourse with a single woman. If she's not married, then the presumption is that through the act of intercourse, he has acquired a wife. So, so adultery, if a man is married to one woman and he has sex with another woman, if she's married, then he has committed adultery. If she is single, he has committed marriage, because since a man could have multiple wives. Anyway, just kind of an aside, but I wanted, you know, that it's also interesting that they felt no shame. They were naked, but they were not ashamed. So I think that's an interesting notion, that if we are naked, the assumption is we feel ashamed. We feel ashamed to be seen.
Why would we in that particular era?
Yeah, why would the
Why would you be ashamed? I mean,
right.
And yet, in the story of Noah, they shame him for being naked and drunk.
Right. So it's not that they shame him. They are concerned that it's not dignified. It's not shameful for your well, you know, this whole idea of
there we go.
okay.
It's a shame that that just happened.
Yes, it really is.
We're not ashamed about it.
Right. So this is when shame, after they eat the fruit of the tree, their eyes are open. They're going to see that they were naked, and that's when the concept of shame enters a human psychology. Yes, Merle and Barry. Singer.
So in Sansino, where it says, and you know, because before eating of the forbidden fruit, they knew nothing of passion. Sansino explains, because so far all their acts were in service of their maker and not for satisfaction of desire. Consequently, the act of cohabitation was as innocent as eating and drinking. It's like they didn't really, I think they weren't ashamed because they didn't know what shame was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rabbi, do you want me to say something about
I would
shame?
love that. So I pinged Felix like 2 minutes before we were about to begin and thought that, he and maybe Owen and the other psychologists among us might tell us a little bit about the evolution of shame, the concept of shame, how shame operates in the human psychology.
Go.
Okay, so shame basically is the experience of being inadequate and being exposed to the public as being inadequate, being found to be inadequate. So that is shame. Contrast that with guilt, where you are adequate, but you are doing the wrong thing, even though you know better and that you're quite capable of doing better.
Would,
And the
would you say
best guilt,
Would you
not
say
guilt, not
guilt is
guilt,
a
guilt,
spiritual,
guilt,
not guilt, guilt.
guilt.
Shame is cultural, guilt is spiritual or divine kind of situation,
Oh,
or not?
No, both are spiritual. Both are spiritual. But the feeling of being inadequate and being exposed for being inadequate is shame. Is it your fault that you're inadequate? That would require 5 years of psychoanalysis.
All right.
And you've got two
Barry,
openings.
wait, Barry Singer and then Owen.
Yeah, no, I'm just on slightly sideways. I'm curious about the Hebrew for shame. What other words come out of that root? Or it comes,
Yitboshashu, they were ashamed. Busha is the noun of shame.
I think shame is learned. I think parents teach children what to be ashamed of. And that it's a direct communication in one form or another, either linguistically or physically, but I think it's taught.
And I would add to that it's culturally relative what they choose to teach their children is shame. In some cultures, what we find shameful is not, and vice versa. Pointing a finger at someone, interrupting people when they speak, like I do all the time. Those are things that that are extremely bad in some cultures, and you have to be taught those rules by your parents. Now, there's a negative and a positive. The positive side is to adapt to the culture you're living in and to get along with society and behave properly so that you maintain yourself in good reputation and good order. But there's the other side of shame, which is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's interesting, Terry, that you bring up interrupting, which I just did to you.
Thank you.
That was definitely, a learning for me, moving from the culture of the East Coast Jewish world to Arizona. In Arizona, it is shameful to interrupt others, and you remember we've made a whole sermon about this, that it is a documented Jewish cultural phenomenon to interrupt. But when I moved to Arizona, I had to adapt to contemporary culture. And Felix says a good author on shame is Sylvan Tompkins, who authored Shame and Its Sisters.
What are its sisters?
Sarah and Rebecca.
Owen?
So I wonder why it's important to introduce this notion of shame so early.
Good
And
question.
in many ways, this is like part of the foundation of religious control, legal statute, the idea of somewhere there's a judge about what's good and bad. what you should feel ashamed of, guilty for, whatever. But that it's amazing. I mean, why weren't they hungry? Why weren't they really excited to be naked and said, wow, let's go celebrate this together in private, although they were in private. It just seems to me to be a fundamental, the first theme of control of human beings.
Whoa.
You know, I think what you're emphasizing, Owen, is just how powerful and primitive that feeling of shame is within us. And Terry said we have to learn shame as young children, what to be ashamed about. It's not something that's inherent within us, and yet we learn it at such a very, very young age. And it's so basic within each of us. I just want to mention, Isabella said Brene Brown has a great TED Talk and book on shame. Can you tell us the executive summary of that, Isabella?
I was trying to look for it. Good morning. I was trying to look for it because I remember in not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was in a class in college, and the instructor presented Brene Brown, introduced me to Brene Brown, and it was exactly the subject of shame and vulnerability. And I was trying to look for it. I don't remember, but I just remember that it was very powerful TED Talk on
Okay.
on shame in a modern sense, but not just for women, but also how men experience shame.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting if we can dig up that TED Talk. Merle, do you want to jump in?
Isn't learning shame as a child, as a young child, just part of growing up with disciplines? And in this case, or learning or accepting discipline, in this case, they were never children. They were suddenly adults. They were created as adults, so they never, I don't think they ever learned any of these emotions or feelings.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Also, I'd like to just get back to Owen's question, which I think is very profound. Why so early with shame? What comes to my mind is as far as the evolution of the story so far, and we're just in the very beginning of the story. Isn't it interesting that shame follows guilt? That first they did wrong. They knew they weren't supposed to, that God told them, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. So they did something wrong.
But they haven't done it yet.
Yeah, that's true.
This verse is introducing that story.
They haven't eaten yet?
They have not
No.
eaten yet. That's going to happen in the next couple of verses. So they're feeling
That doesn't make sense then, does it?
so they're
No.
but they don't feel ashamed. They have no shame, no guilt, nothing. That I think that's the point of how this verse is introducing what's to come. Shame and guilt are about to come hand in hand.
And it's a control feature.
Yeah, that you said that before. How I guess you're right that from a cultural perspective, if we can make people feel ashamed about certain behaviors, then they avoid them. And think about what, when we say that someone is shameless, it means doing something that violates our cultural norms, and they don't feel guilty about it or embarrassed.
The entity that gets to define the norm is in charge.
Isabella is raising her hand. Yes, Isabella. And then Rabbi.
Thank you. If they have not eaten of the forbidden fruit, then how is it I'm trying to rationalize or understand how is it that we learn shame and guilt while we're supposed to be able to exercise freedom. How does that come into play? Like, if I'm going to be shamed and feel guilt about something that I did that I'm supposed to feel shame about, then where does the free will come in?
So I'm going to see if anyone wants to respond to that before I jump in.
Yeah, I want to respond to that
Yeah.
by sidetracking us back to chapter 3, number 4, okay?
Okay.
And the serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad. When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked. And they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. So I might not be understanding this correctly, but to me, this means that first they ate and then their eyes were open.
Yes, no, I think you're definitely understanding that that correctly. So Isabella,
I knew that.
yeah,
Okay, Felix,
yeah, I can validate your reading.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good point.
Yeah,
Thank you too much.
Isabella, I think that
The other one, but-
our freedom of choice is constrained by living in community with others. You know, yes, you have the freedom to choose how you behave, but because we live with others, that freedom of choice is limited. Now, you might say, I don't feel ashamed of being naked, even though there's a cultural norm against that. So I'm going to walk around naked. I feel no shame. I think that there may be, Lisa, I don't know if this is true. Are there laws against public nudity?
There are, but there are, there are exceptions to that. I remember when I was practicing law in Kentucky, there was a specific law that said if you were naked for a religious purpose, that was not illegal.
Huh, that's interesting. And of course, there are clothing optional resorts I know that people go to. So my guess is that if you are naked in that environment, that's not illegal. So then whether you feel shame or embarrassment is subjective. But to Isabella's point about freedom of choice, yes, I have freedom of choice, but there are laws that define how I can behave when I'm in public, and places where it's okay to be naked and places where it's illegal to be naked. I know, beaches have these issues, and you talk about cultural norms. There are many places in the world where it's perfectly legal and culturally acceptable for both men and women to be topless at a beach. Whereas in the United States, for the most part, my understanding is that is illegal. So you may not feel shame, but your freedom of choice is limited because of the law. David, I know you've been trying to get in here.
I was reading something by Leibowitz, and she was citing Judah on the sea, saying that Adam and Eve, prior to chapter 3, could listen to God and stand and face him without any problems. Once they ate the apple, they were no longer able to, which indicates nothing to do with the word shame per se, but it's the acknowledgement or knowledge that you've acquired. So I'm not quite sure why they used the word shame I can't figure that out. And by the way, if anybody's ever worked in an orchard picking figs, you know they never sew together fig leaves. Guarantee it.
It's a lot of fig.
Where did they get the thread to sew it together?
The yucca plant.
Maybe it was a different variety of figs.
all right,
that had
Terry.
big leaves.
Terry Berman?
I agree with David on the question. I've been having the same question about why they use the word shame.
Busha.
And one of I don't know, is one of the sisters embarrassment? Because
Yeah.
one of the things, one of the things that I keep thinking is that there is a difference between being embarrassed and feeling shame.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think shame,
Good point. Yeah.
in my view, is something that is taught, as other people have said. I think Merle's alluded to this too, that you can feel embarrassed without feeling a deep shame, that it's something that's over with quickly, and you get over it too.
Yeah.
And so does everybody around you. But when something inside you takes that and works it and grinds it to a pulp, you may never meet that other person's eyes again. And that's where the shame comes in. And that's where you mentioned about, being able to look God in the face. Oh my God, I can't look him in the face anymore because I've done something that I probably shouldn't have done. Although I enjoyed it very much, and I guess we get to do it again, but because we have to make babies and things like that. But I wonder how much of this, we're reading into this as though it's a literal story, and there's so many problems with that. I can't even begin to go into them. But if it was literal, I always think of God the parent in these early things, and I think he may have overstepped a little bit in this area. I'm not sure, but he could see the future theoretically, right? So he knew where this would lead, and it's almost as though if they hadn't eaten from the apple, they would have learned these things eventually, because eventually there would have been a baby and God knows what. But I don't know. I think embarrassment and shame are two different things, even though they're related.
Yeah.
And I think being embarrassed might be closer to what I think they would feel at that moment.
Yeah, I wanted to share the comment in the Eitz Chaim here. It says, they felt no shame. They were capable of sexual activity, but had not come to associate their sexual organs with misuse, lust, or shame.
Right.
So
The other thing I was thinking about is it's very interesting to me that and also unbelievable to me that they've got this naked body and they've had sex, but somehow or another they perceive exactly which parts of them they have to cover. They didn't put a bag over their head. They knew exactly. They didn't cover their feet.
Are you
They
sure?
knew. No, I'm not sure of anything. I just,
it looks like Isabella found the link. So if anybody wants to take note of that. And Felix is writing PSA embarrassment.
Yeah. Psychoanalytically, embarrassment has more to do with the right of one's privacy being violated. If I want something to be publicized, and it's about me, then I have the right to either have it publicized or keep it private. When I'm embarrassed, it means something about me has been publicized that I'd rather not be public.
Terry?
that's a big embarrassment or whatever. I'm talking about things like, I've done this. I mean, I mentioned interrupting, and I never think of it without thinking about when I was the education director at Temple Solel. We used to have education director meetings citywide. And there was a woman at Bethel at the time who was, I think she was Israeli, which may explain everything I'm about to say.
Oh, you
won't go there.
And I interrupted her. And I was young. I was 28, 29 years old at the time. And boy,
were
did
just
she,
a child.
I was a baby. And, but 50 years later, I remember it distinctly. And I remember the shame and embarrassment that I had. Somebody can call you out on something, even in a conversation, that can make, or you say something you shouldn't have said, and you realize too late that you've offended somebody or you've gone over somebody's line, and you feel a tremendous amount of shame and embarrassment. And at least I do. I don't know about anybody else. Some of us get that way. But
absolutely, Terry, it wounds us on such a deep level. The rabbis say that if you embarrass someone in public, it's the equivalent of murder.
Yeah.
When Maimonides talks about shares in the world to come, and who shall have a share in the world to come, somebody who commits physical murder can be forgiven. Someone who embarrasses a person, it's eternally unforgivable. And I think it's speaking to what Terry's saying, that, if you kill someone's body, it's one thing. If you kill their soul, it's, that's what that embarrassment feels like. And, you're right, Terry, I can connect back to, moments of elementary school where I felt embarrassed, and it still sits with me. It's very, very hard to get past that. Isabella says, I was thinking more chronically from at that time, and we seem to go between that era and today's interpretation of shame. I think that, what Terry and I are talking about may be a partial response to Owen's question, which is, why does the Torah address this so early on? Because it is, it's something that we all connect to so deeply and powerfully. And it's something that we encounter at a very young age. I'm thinking also, as we're talking about, I have, 5 grandchildren, 5 and under. And watching the process of them, running around happily carefree naked, to having to be taught which parts of your body do you keep covered, which parts of your body are private, which parts of your body can you touch in public, which parts of your body can you only touch in private, which parts of your body can you only touch in your behind closed doors in your own room, even with your family. There are kids have to learn that there are parts of their bodies that you don't touch, even sitting around your living room with your family. And it's
or parts of other people's bodies that you don't touch.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
Yeah, Lisa.
It's a lifelong learning process.
I can't help but think, what a Western interpretation we give to this.
Uh-huh.
And I think about, how cultures may have changed in the New World as Europeans came to the New World and encountered the people of, particularly Central and South America. And as Europeans came to places like Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, and imposed our Western understanding of all these things on people who had totally different understandings of these things. Right. So I think about how Western this is, even though the authorship of this isn't particularly Western.
Yes, yes, you have all the things that the Torah could have initially identified with shame. It's nakedness. Barry Singer had his hand up, and then Terry.
Yeah, I was just, I'll just forget my sixth grade teacher, one of the few men I had as an elementary student. First day of class, Mr. Bernstein said, "I will never embarrass any of you in front of the class."
And
That was,
and that was so meaningful to you to know that your soul was going to be protected
yeah.
from that embarrassment. Wow, Terry.
Yeah, my question is a literary one now. I'm just wondering, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wonder how much of this is needed. This conversation is needed in order to go on and discuss the next few things in Genesis that are going to happen. That we need to have shame established before Noah. We need to have shame established before we get into, Benjamin and Joseph and all of those people. It has to be understood and worked with a little bit before the next stories can take place.
Right, and
So,
talk about Benjamin and Joseph. I well, God willing, we'll get there. And they are between shame and guilt, and we'll have to unravel those threads.
that's all.
But here we are. The two of them were naked, the man and his woman. Interesting. It has to tell us who they are. You like, there were only two people around. It could have just the two of them were naked and they didn't feel ashamed. Like, it's kind of.
I guess they have to clarify because there were a lot of animals there.
Yeah, I guess so. Isabella, is there not a difference between CSLY, intentional embarrassment, and unintentional embarrassment of another? What's CSLY?
Consciously.
Oh, consciously
Oh.
intentional embarrassment and unintentional embarrassment. Sure, I think consciously embarrassing someone is worse. I think there is an element of intentionality that colors whether or not how culpable we are for embarrassment. But nevertheless, even if it was unintentional, we are responsible for our choice of words, our actions that may cause embarrassment. And that's probably why the rabbis put such a strong statement that it's the equivalent of murder, just to make us really consciously think about what we're going to say and do, and if it might cause any embarrassment.
So if it's unintentional, we can still go to Olam Haba as long as we try to take responsibility for the unintentional act.
There would be a process of teshuvah, a great process of teshuvah that would have to be part of that. Yes, Merle.
So I'm thinking of unintentional. Sasha was told to do something last week in school, and she had a smart, for lack of better terminology, she had a smart ass comment back at the teacher, and she had to come home and write this letter of apology, and the teacher lives right behind them. So she had to walk the letter over and apologize in public, as well as in public to the teacher, as well as give her this letter. But I think of it when we've all discussed it with her, or when she brought up what she did, she said she didn't say it on purpose. It just slipped out of her mouth. But she's 8, but the teshuvah was that she had to not only write the letter, but she had to walk down the street and deliver the letter and say it publicly to the teacher and whatever people might have been around that the teacher was tutoring. And she had to go back to class on Monday and realize that she doesn't when she's told something she has to do in the classroom, you don't get to just be snarky
Yeah.
and make a comment. So that's the teshuva in a way.
Yeah, so she learned she's responsible for what comes out of her mouth. It doesn't
Right.
just come out by itself.
Right.
And B, she needs to offer a heartfelt apology. And it's interesting in our tradition, verbal confession is an important part of teshuva. It's not enough to feel bad, to feel ashamed. We have to actually own up to what we did. Barry Singer, you wanted to tell us a story?
Yeah, it was okay in the chat, but Judge Judy has actually had the same teacher, and she has shared that when she was ill with, I think, rheumatic fever for a full year, he was calling her regularly. That it was just a major part of her life too.
Mhm.
We had the same teacher, not the same year.
So shame connected to physical nakedness. That's the first place, it seems, that we learn to be ashamed, is learn to be ashamed of our bodies. And, you know, as those words are coming out of my mouth right now, I'm thinking about particularly Western norms about the body. And, you know, to your point, Lisa, you know, I think men feel it almost as much as women, but we have such a narrow standard of physical beauty anymore in our culture that it's very easy for all of us to feel ashamed of our naked bodies. None of them are good enough for the narrow cultural definition of what is beautiful. And that's another place that we all experience shame. And Isabella wants to disagree that it's different for men and women. Yeah.
I think society and can support me that shame is experienced different for men and women. And in my opinion, society has been harder on women for experiencing shame of all types. Body dysmorphia is one of the biggest one.
Yeah.
Now, in recent years, men have, you know, it's been noted that men do experience that as well, but not to the same degree that women do.
All right, so you're asking two different questions. One is the general, do men and women experience shame differently? And then specifically on the issue of body dysmorphia, which is what I was trying to address, and to be sensitive about the fact that I understand that that is becoming more of an issue for men. I do think it's the case that there is a more broad acceptance of a diversity of physical appearances for men than for women. Women are held to a more narrow standard. It's a little bit more broad for men, but I think that there is an increase in male body dysmorphia in the last number of decades, and that could be attributed likely to the explosion of media. And Lisa, yeah, Lisa.
You know, I know we've talked about this before, but so I think there's a very early incidents in Torah of the shame men feel when God lies to Abraham.
Yes,
about what Sarah says about him.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Abraham might potentially be embarrassed about being too old to engage in sexual activity. And so God protects his feelings. Yeah, that's a great example. And yes, Felix, were you at services Friday night? Did you watch the prayer lab?
Yes.
So there you go. We had that.
That's what made me all of a sudden connect here.
Yeah.
Masking, hiding, you know, all of a sudden they realized that they weren't covered. They weren't masked. They weren't hidden enough somehow.
Right. And that's the first thing that's going to happen after their eyes are opened is they hide.
Yeah. And trailing thought on that is, you know, culturally, of course, among certain religions and cultures, a woman not only has to mask her body, but also her face
Yes.
and her hair.
Right. Yeah. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, obviously in the army, and mostly I was on military installations, so not out in the community, but the few times that I was out in the community with women who were wearing burqas and chadors, I remember one of the things that was most jarring to me was that, you know, not only the entire body covered, not only the entire face covered, in some of those cultures, there's even over the eyes, there's a netting so that the woman can see out, but it's still concealing her face, and also gloves, even
gloves. Yeah.
the hand
Gloves.
had to be hidden. So yeah, that would be interesting to know what the correlation is of women's experience of shame about their physical appearance in that environment. Yeah, Sarah Lee?
I don't think it's women that might feel ashamed. It's the men that put them in that kind of position, that make them into nothings. We were at the airport many years ago, and there was there were two women like that. They looked like two statues draped in black. There was nothing even over the eyes, and there was a very elegantly dressed Arab man with a tunic and pantaloons, and he was directing, you know, where to put the baggage and everything. And I thought, how could anybody do that to somebody else, to negate them to nothing? It was horrendous looking, and they had a little boy who was dressed just like the father. But it looked like two draped black statues. And I don't know if those women felt ashamed. I think they felt like they were nothing. And I think that's the purpose of it. So I don't think shame was involved in that. The man had no shame in what he was doing to a woman.
Yeah, I agree.
When the last time I was in London, there were a lot of women walking around exactly as you described in the full Monty, and we went into it's the opposite of the full Monty. I understand.
It's the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the empty Monty. Okay, whatever. Anyway, we went into Harrods, and we're just walking around, especially that first floor where the, you know, handbags for $5,000 for something that looks like an apple with sequins on it, and the watches and all the expensive stuff and the makeup. And these women were clustered around the makeup aisle and buying tons and tons of stuff. And I've read a lot of things and seen a lot of things, and also discussed this with some Muslim friends who wear they don't wear the hijab, but they wear, well, maybe it is, I can't remember now what just the partial, the head covering is called. Yes. And they find it liberating in some sense. So this is a cultural thing. Yeah. Sarah Lee, when we look at it, I had the same feeling. I shuddered when I saw the women walking around. And then I see them chatting with each other and sitting at the hookah bars on the streets, and they're smoking with their husbands and their friends, and they're doing all these things. We look at it that way because it's not our way. They look at it very differently. And Terry, wait a second. Jews are not exempt from this. We're not.
No, they're not.
Women are dirty. Women are impure. Right. Women have to go to the mikveh to get rid of that blood. women can't touch the Torah, women can't, could go on and on and on with what a woman can't do. Don't show her hair, don't show her this, go home, be quiet, don't interrupt, don't do any of those things that men do all the time, because that's not your place. I'm thinking of the red tent, even back in those days, you know, that women can't even menstruate without feeling shame or being locked away, and so on and so forth. So it's not so much, you know, that they put on a black thing. I think I think we can find ways to put that black thing on without wearing a black thing.
Okay,
That's what I'm
Terry,
trying
what
to
I was
say.
going to say is, isn't that the same dynamic related to the mechitza?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
But if you know, if there's a book that I would recommend reading because it gives you a whole insight into the women's psyche in Arabia that are in this kind of a situation. The book is written by Carmen bin Laden. She is a sister-in-law to Osama, and the book's title is In the Kingdom. And she meets her husband basically real quickly. He is one of the princes of the Arabian family. She meets him in college in the United States and she lives this free life. But once they get married, she is brought back to this culture where she is secreted in the, I forgot what the word is, where the women are completely secluded. It's a very interesting book because it goes into the psyche of these women. And they feel very protected.
All right, thank you for that recommendation, Sarah Lee. David is dutifully raising his hand, and then Kat and Michelle and Sherry have some comments in the chat. So David, you have the floor.
Well, when it comes to the word shame, I'm still not quite sure how shame got into a sexual nature. Shame could come in many forms, and because it says shame, we're going off on one tangent. If you're learning languages, you can be shamed by yourself. You could be shamed by using a word wrong. You can make other people ashamed, but it has nothing to do with a sexual nature. So the word shame in that context, I'm not sure what it means within that context. It's sort of, we're stuffing it in and coming up with certain ideas about that. And as for masks, I think masks are a great thing. If you're working in an office, you may cover up your feelings about somebody because that person is a great worker. You don't like them and you treat them respectfully or privately, you put a mask on. And we all do that all the time because there are people we like and dislike, but we try to be equal. So we all wear masks at different times and different reasons. So I don't see there's anything wrong with masks. In fact, you know, Felix, you know, you look great with a handlebar mustache. Put on your mask.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And for those of you who didn't tune into services Friday night, you might want to go back and if you go on the Temple Chai website, it was captured. But the whole theme was masks. And you know, remember we just celebrated Tu B'Shvat, and we ate the different fruits that symbolize the different levels of relationship, and we have those relationships where we protect ourselves, you know, symbolized by the fruits with an inedible outer core, and we let people in a little bit, but then we have those fruits with a hard center that is impenetrable, and that's where we let people in a little bit more. And then furthermore, we have those relationships where we can be totally open. So there's, I really didn't plan for us to spend the entire hour on this, but that's how it evolved. And let's look at the chat. And Kat and Michelle, do you want to share your point?
So the bottom line, it was shameful for us to spend this much time on that one.
So it may have been shameful, but I hope you don't feel embarrassed to just drive that distinction. Kat and Michelle, are you still there?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's basically just kind of what I said in the chat. It was just kind of processing like why why shame about nakedness when like it's just how they were created, and that's kind of something that's bugged me. But I think I'm kind of coming to realize like I think a lot of the what we consider shame is largely more due to our awareness of what other people see and have an interest in, or is important to them, or they consider about us. And so that's why like you mentioned, small children like have no concept of it, no shame, it doesn't matter. And it's as they get older that they start to conceptualize that, both being taught and just becoming aware. But it ultimately really has to do with realizing that like you're naked and other people are potentially interested in that, and you are maybe interested in that in other people, and so maybe that's something to kind of keep to yourself, because it makes relationships a little more challenging.
So it's distracting and a means of social control to keep us more focused on whatever is going on in the moment, not to be distracted by the physical elements.
Partly, yeah.
Sherry?
My comment really is very much in light of some things that other people are saying. Shame is I think not a universal, it's a universal feeling, but the causes of it are not universal. I think they're very, very culturally dependent. It is very culturally dependent. I can remember I was working for a little bit in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, and I was appalled walking through these immense shopping centers with men in their shorts and t-shirts and their women covered head to toe, including the lace gloves, in just walking around, and I'm like, this is absurd.
Yeah. Tough.
Right. So Lisa?
Well, Sherry says here that some women feel safe being covered. And I think that just points to the fact that, so often men feel like women's bodies are theirs for the taking. I don't think there's probably a woman here who has not been grabbed, groped, in some public situation. We think about, Arab women being covered, but boy, that idea that women's bodies are for men to take just seems universal, no matter what the culture is.
Yeah, I imagine that's true. I'm thinking, immediately, of course, about incidents in my own life where that occurred, Lisa, and you're absolutely right. So it looks like there's a call for Felix to have the final word in our last moment here. Felix, you started us off, and we'll give you the last word.
It was this gets to David's point, really. It was the tree of knowledge, not the tree of sex or nakedness, that brought shame. So shame has something to do with knowledge. I think also implied in that is being trying to make ourselves equal to God, knowing as much as God knows. It's a shame and a shanda.
Shanda. That was
Shanda, yeah.
good with that good Yiddish word for shame, shanda. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yivru amen. I hope to see many of you this afternoon driving by the temple, picking up your goodie bags. And also Thursday night is our adult Purim spiel. A lot of energy has gone into making a fun night, so please zoom in with us then. And
Thank
everyone
you.
have a good week. Thank you very
You
much.
Thank you.
Thank
This was
you.
wonderful. Thank